Here we go. Hello, class. My name is Hunter Markowski, and today my group and I are going to be talking about a really serious topic. And as you can see, it's all about depression. And more specifically, we're going to talk about ways we can decrease depression in various ways besides medication. So I'm sure all of you could agree with me that there's a lot of debilitating obstacles we have as undergraduate students that affect our academic performance. There's a lot of things that can lower our academic performance and cause us to be distracted and whatnot. And I would say that probably the number one is depression. That's probably the most common obstacle and most debilitating obstacle to our performance as students. Now, there's a lot of things that can cause depression, of course. And what we have found through our research is that the number one factor that goes into depression is a decrease of neurotransmitters binding at the postsynaptic neuron. Now, we've talked a lot about neurotransmitters in the past in this class, epinephrine, norepinephrine, but one that we haven't spent a whole lot of time on is serotonin. Now, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and when there are decreased levels of serotonin in our bodies, we find that we're more susceptible to depression. And in this light, the more we increase serotonin levels, the more we decrease our depression levels and vice versa. So there are a lot of different ways to treat depression. Most of those ways that we found is just by simply increasing our serotonin levels. Now, the most common way that providers are using to increase serotonin levels is by prescribing medication. Now, these medications are most commonly known as SSRIs, which pretty much just means that they inhibit the reuptake of serotonin into the presynaptic neuron, which means that there is more serotonin left in the synaptic cleft, and then therefore there's more serotonin binding to our receptors, which then increases our mood. So we found that, there's different ways to increase serotonin levels that we can do as students to decrease depression and raise serotonin. And some of those ways we'll talk about in just a minute, but we have found that one of the best ways we can improve serotonin levels is just by doing things that increase our mood, things that we find enjoyable, like activities or sports, or things that really engage us and capture our attention and help us feel joy. Now, Brendan Louder, this is one of my classmates who's doing this presentation. Let me give you an example. One thing that gives Brendan joy is woodwork. And this is a really great example. He really loves woodwork, and that's something that really helps him improve his serotonin levels. He loves to do it. It gives him joy, and it helps his mood. Christian Bickmore, he really loves to go on jogs and running, and we'll talk about exercise, but just the mere fact that he loves to run and loves to jog and exercise helps him increase his serotonin levels, which then decreases levels of depression. For myself, I really love being outside in nature. One thing I really enjoy to do is fly fishing. And just when I'm out fly fishing, I can tell that I'm in a better state of mind. I can kind of tell that my serotonin levels are increasing, especially when I catch a fish. That's great. So some other ways, and my classmates here that I'm with are going to introduce these topics more thoroughly. But some other ways is having a proper diet, exercising regularly, and even something as simple as being in bright lights can also have a positive impact on serotonin levels and thus decrease our levels of depression. So there's many ways besides medication, and that's the main point we want to get across, is that there's so many ways that we can increase our serotonin and increase our mood. and I'll let Christian do the rest.
All right, so I'm Christian Bickmore, fellow classmate of Hunter, and I'm going to expand upon some of the things that Hunter talked about. First, I'm going to talk about bright light. So Hunter, he mentioned how bright light can increase the serotonin levels. So basically, well, before I get into it, I want to preface this by saying, when we say bright light, we're not just referring to light such as the light of this classroom. It's something much brighter than that. So the main source of bright light that we have day to day is the sun. And so that the sun, or bright lights like the sun, our time exposed to those lights will increase our serotonin levels. So as you can see on this graph, this was data taken from a study where they did a post-mortem biopsy of deceased members' brains. And they evaluated the levels of serotonin. And they did this for people who died in the winter and in the summer. And on this graph, on the x-axis, it's just 1 bar for the winter and 1 bar for the summer. And on the y-axis is the levels of serotonin that was found within their brains. And the reason why this is important is because, well, as you guys know, during winter months, there's much less hours of sunlight. And so because of that, people don't get as much exposure to bright light. While in the summer, the opposite is true. There's a lot more sun, way more hours spent in sunlight. So this graph, it leads us to believe that when we get more exposure to the sun and to bright light, as the people in the summer do, it will increase our levels of serotonin. And as Hunter said, as we increase our levels of serotonin, it will decrease the likelihood and the severity of depression. Going along with that, there's another study done where instead of just looking at different seasons, they looked at the hours of sunlight per day. So regardless of the season, so they did individual days throughout the entire year. And on this graph, we have on the y-axis is serotonin levels, and the x-axis is hours of sunlight per day, with this longer graph being 15, this second graph being 10, graph number 3 being 6 hours, and graph number 4 being 4 hours per day. And so this, as you can see, the days with less sunlight had much lower levels of serotonin as compared to the days with a greater amount of sunlight. So this, again, it tells us that if we get more exposure to sun, or just bright light in general, that we will increase the levels of serotonin, which encourages me to put forth a greater effort to spend more time outside so I can increase my serotonin levels, be happier, and help fight off depression. And these graphs are so clinically important that people have started implementing practices to fight off low serotonin levels in places where they have less sun. So in Scandinavia, they've started making artificial bright light exposure clinics, which during the winter seasons, there's such few hours of sunlight that people are so serotonin depleted that they'll go to places that have bright light that mimic the sun just so they can get some exposure, because they know that bright light exposure is so important to our serotonin levels that they'll go out of the way to get this artificial bright light to increase their serotonin levels. And another thing I want to talk about is diet. Hunter mentioned how we were going to go over that. And something that's really interesting is what we eat can affect our mood. But it's a little bit more complex than that. So I want to talk about is, a lot of people have heard about how turkey and bananas has tryptophan in it, which tryptophan is one of the main precursors to serotonin. So our body needs tryptophan to get serotonin. So something I always believed is that if I ate turkey, it would increase my tryptophan levels, which would increase my serotonin levels. However, we've discovered that even though turkey has tryptophan, it won't increase your tryptophan levels in your body, because your body, it looks at the concentration of tryptophan compared to other amino acids. So although turkey has tryptophan, it has a lot more of differing amino acids, and our body will prioritize the other amino acids over tryptophan, and we won't absorb tryptophan. The same is true in bananas. However, milk has an unusually high concentration of tryptophan compared to the other amino acids. So drinking milk helps raise our tryptophan levels, which in turn helps raise our serotonin levels, which would in turn increase our mood. And the thing that's really interesting about this, and something that we want to push for in the future, is that we can selectively breed crops and food to have a higher level of tryptophan concentration versus the other amino acids. What this means is that we could take crops, breed them, and in a few generations have a crop that has a higher concentration of tryptophan, which would then allow us to absorb the tryptophan as we ate it, increasing our serotonin levels and increasing our mood. And so if we could put forth the effort and research to do this, we could help make a generation of people with a lower level of depression and lower severity of depression.
Hi, my name is Brendan Louder, and my main purpose today is to bring this puppy home. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exercise. All right. So when we exercise, what's happening in our body? What is so good about exercise that makes people need and want to do it? And a lot of the research we've done and we've found is that exercise actually increases serotonin levels. And a byproduct of serotonin is this thing called 5-HIAA. And so this little graph here we've got a representation of it was taken with people before they exercised and after they exercised. And it was a sample of their CSF fluid. And what they found was that before somebody exercised, the levels of 5-HIAA was much lower than after they exercised. And so over here on our y-axis, we have the level in the CSF, and then below here we also have our before and after exercise. And so what we found from this was before exercising, there's not as much serotonin pumping through the body. And after we exercise, that level is raised. And so simply by exercising more often, we can increase our serotonin levels in our body. The same was found in rats. And in this study, we see that the levels of 5-HIAA in their blood was increasing as they continuously were exercising. And this is pretty interesting information, and it helps us to understand that the more often we exercise, the happier we will truly be. Not for just body image issues and purposes like that, but also scientifically and physiologically, we know that we can increase our serotonin levels by exercising. So wrapping it all together with our mood, with our diet, through bright lights and through exercise, we can completely refocus and increase our serotonin levels, which would decrease the depression in the United States. And we have found from all this research and all this data that if people continue to put these things first in their lives, that we will surely cure depression. Maybe not all the way. Obviously, there's other ways, other reasons why depression happens, but this is a great way that we can combat depression, especially in our busy lives as college students. We're grateful for you listening to this presentation and wish you the best in your endeavors with depression.